Hey, what's up out there, everybody? Hold on, let's get in focus real quick. I don't know why my camera does not like to stay in focus. I should probably switch that out sometime. If anybody's got good camera recommendations, by the way, let me know. I'm using the Brio 4K one. Works pretty well, but I have that constant issue of focus, and it's not perfect, so always up to ideas for new stuff. Today, I wanted to just go over questions, lots and lots of questions. Oh, and I should probably mute myself so that I don't hear myself playing in the background, right? But we'll just hit some questions you guys have. If you got them, drop them in the chat. There were a couple that came in before, so I'm going to hit those, and then we'll talk about psychopaths in a bit more. Too. There's a lot of stuff I want to cover today, so let's just get going. I wanted to kick it off real quick with the first couple questions that I got, and I actually wrote these down and tried to find some reasonable answers to them. And the first one was just about building a game with mods. So I sorry I didn't write down the names, guys. I should have. But I copied them into a Google Doc and forgot about that part. But the question was about if it's possible to make a game that's ready for player mods, so that you can make mods for the kind of game where any old player can go out, mod your game, and make it better. It's basically like the reason that Minecraft is a big giant mega hit, right? Like if you can do that kind of thing in Unity. And the answer was definitely yes. So I mean, if you look at a couple big games like Kerbal Space Program, built in Unity, does exactly that, or Unturned, another really good example of that. And I think there are quite a few of these out there. I don't know all of them, but you definitely can do it. You'll need to use asset bundles. You need to use interfaces. I haven't done code mods in a very long time, so I know there were some restrictions and there was some stuff I had to do to work around that. I don't remember the exact details of it though, but I'd love to do a video on just that subject because I think it's interesting. I mean, the idea is that you give a bunch of hooks for your players to hook into, or your game programming / designy players to hook into, and then they make custom stuff for your game and make your game better, extend it out. I mean, literally, this is why Minecraft is a multi-billion-dollar game and not some little thing where you run around and hit blocks and die off instantly. Because of the modding, you can really make an insane game, or a game that explodes into giant awesomeness. Let's go on to the next question real quick. Do you know a way to serialize generic variables and show them in the inspector? This is something I haven't actually had to do. But when I got the question, I went through, did a little bit of looking. It looks like there are some ways that people have hacked around it. It does not seem easy, and I haven't come up with a really good scenario for it. So if you have, what I was wondering is if you could just send me the use case, like maybe a detailed example of what it is you're trying to accomplish there. I just want to make sure that if I might be able to find a good way to do it. I just want to make sure that it's the right solution to the problem too, and that I'm not missing something else or some easy tip that I could give you that might simplify it a bit. The next question was, is it better to use asset store stuff for prototyping, or should I make my own so I can learn more? By the way, people asking about Psychos, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So yeah, this is kind of an interesting question. So it's like, should I use asset store stuff or make my own to learn more? It depends. A lot of the time, what I recommend is using a lot of art from the asset store when you're getting started, because it'll make your thing a little bit more interesting. It'll make it more fun, and it'll kind of inspire you and give you new ideas. A lot of the time when people are trying to learn how to do game development, they know they want to make a game. They have like a really light idea of what they'd like to do, but not really any plan for it. And when they start pulling in cool art from the art or the asset store, kind of gives them a little bit of direction and a way to go with it. Now, when it comes to building like game systems, I wouldn't do it from the start, because you don't know the quality of the code in there. You don't know if they're doing really, really bad things, if they're doing really sloppy things, really bad performant things. You don't know if they're doing things that there's a new, easier way to do. And you're not going to know that if you're just starting out. So it doesn't mean that you shouldn't grab anything from the asset store, but I wouldn't just start with asset store stuff and not do any coding on your own. If you want to grab asset store packs, run around, figure out how they work, play with them, maybe even build on top of them, awesome. But if that's all you're doing and you're not learning the code and writing your own code and building your own stuff, you're eventually going to fall behind, and you're going to find that you can't really build games. You can just kind of slap some things together, but you're constantly running into problems where this thing doesn't quite work right with this thing, and I don't know how to fix it, and now it's a giant nightmare. Where if you had built it yourself or had a slightly better understanding of how it all worked, it'd be a simple thing. So I would say definitely use asset store stuff for prototyping with the visuals. Use it for systems. Like if you want a UI system, grab a nice asset store UI system like Doozy UI or something. If you want a very specific thing, grab that. Maybe learn from it, maybe implement it, but don't make it like your only way that you try to learn. Somebody else mentioned they had a problem with the Unity editor not responding when they're using NordVPN. I didn't know about this, but apparently there's an issue with NordVPN's client and opening the Unity editor and a shader compilation that opens a local socket. So there's a Reddit post and a GitHub link about it. They recommended using OpenVPN or using this Python script, though, that fixed it up. So if you have that problem, just search for NordVPN Unity. You'll see the Reddit thread. But they really, I think, just use OpenVPN. I use OpenVPN all the time with Unity, and I have no problems. Of course, I'm not using NordVPN, though. Let's see. Another question that was in here was, hi there. How do you handle collaboration in Unity using Git or some other VCS? They're having issues with prefab modification, scene changes, and they wanted to know if there's best practice for source control in Unity. If you're not using source control, by the way, you should be. So anybody out there who's watching thinking like, hey, well, I don't know what that is, you should look into it. You should at least get very familiar with the basics. Try out collaborate first. It's the simplest one. You don't really have to learn much or do anything. You click a couple buttons, push stuff, and all of your code is there. You go back and undo things. You get a huge benefit. Now, when it comes to a bigger team, though, where you're running into these problems like prefab mods and you have conflicts on your scene files or your prefabs or whatever other thing. Usually, it's going to be prefabs and scenes, though, because those are the things that multiple people are working on. So what I've seen work really well, a couple things. The first is with scenes, is splitting the scene into multiple parts. So instead of having a single scene for your level, having 4 or 5 scenes that are different parts of the level that are logically separated by who would work on them. So if you have one person that's doing particle effects, that could be its own scene that's just loaded additively so that particle effects are there. You can do the same for terrain or placement of NPCs or whatever objects there are. You can split these all into separate layers. That usually will help enough so that you don't have multiple people of different disciplines stomping on each other's changes accidentally, because that's usually where that happens. It's rare that you have 2 designers working on the same little level and they're constantly struggling and fighting back and forth. It could happen, but it's not nearly as common because they're usually communicating more. It's usually a problem with going across disciplines. So I like that. The other thing is shrinking prefabs quite a bit, and now using prefab variants helps quite a bit too. So you can, it's not going to help completely, right? You're still going to run into problems with merges and merge conflicts. But there's also a scene merge tool. I've used it a little bit. I don't normally use it though. So I would say go with those. Shrink the prefabs if you can, and definitely split the scene up. I don't have any really great tip beyond that, though. Now let me go through questions real quick. Let's see. I'm looking in chat just to see what else we have. Okay, what would you recommend as a way to step up to higher knowledge of programming, like effective use of abstract and interfaces, delegates, lambdas, event handlers, design patterns? Okay. So there's, I guess if the question is like how to learn those things or what I would recommend, outside of my own videos on them, like I've got a whole solid and design patterns series, I recommend watching things like, I recommend this all the time, but the Pluralsight design pattern library was really eye-opening for me. It showed me a lot of design patterns that I wouldn't have even considered existing and should have known about. The other things, I'm trying to think of other really good places for learning about this stuff. I like a lot of Bob Martin videos. Uncle Bob, if you've heard of him. He's an old programmer, talks all kinds of cool stuff, and I've learned a ton just from watching his stuff. And I'm trying to think of other good design pattern books. I don't know. I need to find another really good design pattern source. As soon as I do, I'll share it. Let's see. Where do you find simple assets like PNGs for icons, crosshairs, and the UI? That's a good question. I usually search either on the asset store. I'll like do a quick search for crosshair in the asset store, look for free things, see if there's something that'll kind of fit. Or I'll do a Google image search, or if it's something that where I need like a permanent one that I need to know that I have a license to and stuff, I'll go to something like OpenGameArt or back to that asset store. So Google search is great when you want to just like toss something in, you're just messing around with it. But a lot of the time you don't know the licensing on those files. With the crosshair, may not end up being an issue, but obviously with bigger stuff, it could be a problem. But yeah, I usually, like I said, go to Google, OpenGameArt, and in the asset store. Let's see, what else do we have here? Questions. Somebody said they're enjoying Q&As. Oh, I'm glad you're enjoying them. I have fun doing them. I was wondering what your experience on fuck-ups during project development. Wrong assumptions, missed deadlines. Did it happen to you? How do you handle them? What are the consequences? That's an awesome question. So I've seen that pretty much everywhere. I almost never see anybody give correct estimates. And when people ask me for estimates, I really just try to avoid lying to them, because when we estimate things, what I've learned is that unless we've done the thing a lot of times, we don't really know. We're just making a guess. We could be dead on. We could be off by a factor of 10. If it's something that we've done a million times, it's a repeated thing, well, we probably should have automated it, right? But if we couldn't automate it and we did it, then sure, we can estimate that. There are some things that I think are very easy to estimate, like how long it's going to take to build whatever thing, barring no problems, like some physical thing. Like, I'm sure the dude that built that night back there knows how long it takes him to build a night, and he could estimate, the number of days or weeks that it takes to put something like that together. When it comes to code, it's like building the night for the first time. You've never built the night. You have a couple pieces of it. You might have put some of those things together. Maybe you built a helmet, but never a whole thing. And then you're just guessing, right? You're trying to figure out what it's going to be. So I guess the point there is just that estimates are always lies, right? I always think of them as lies, and I always see people miss them. I very rarely see people make their estimated dates for just about anything. And I've seen this at every company I've been at, in every type of industry I've seen. So it's not or every type of software industry I've seen. It's not a common thing or a specific thing just to game development. Or the problems that occur from that tend to be that people get frustrated, people get angry, people end up working too much, introducing new bugs. There are a lot of different problems that occur. Usually it ends up just with a lot of burnout and a lack of trust in the scheduling and planning. So if the planning is constantly wrong, people stop trusting it, right? Like, and eventually, at almost every company I've been at, that's been the case. I could just kind of stop trusting the planning and always just assume that there's a 50% chance that the entire thing is going to change. I mean, I thinking like outside of game development, right? I went to, what was it, like 2 weeks worth of meetings on this project at Qualcomm. We had multiple days where there were like 10, 15 people in a room, all planning this big giant project that's supposed to go on for months. And shortly after those, like, oh yeah, we canceled the whole thing because we realized that nobody actually wanted it, right? I was like, what? So, and this was like the thing that had like, a good, I don't know how much planning, but months worth of planning, it seemed. Definitely tons and tons of hours of developer time, management time, director time. And it was not a rare thing, right? Like, people come up with ideas, people start building stuff, and stuff goes bad. Anyway, let's go on to the next thing. The next question was about Psychopaths. So I did put it in the title. I wanted to talk about it a little bit. And it mostly just came from a really weird thing that popped up yesterday. So I'm looking at YouTube yesterday, like I always do, and a video pops up. I think it was how to tell if your wife is a psychopath, or some number of ways to tell if your wife is a psychopath. And I was like, that seems funny and interesting, right? So I clicked on it. It was this guy, Dr. Grande. I think that was how you pronounce his name. You search for him, you'll find Ariana Grande. But if you look on YouTube, you'll see his stuff. And anyway, it was interesting watching. He's going through this list of things that psychopathic wives do. It was a relationship or a scenario where you have a non-psycho husband and a psychopath wife from a doctoral psychoanalyzing point of view. And he's just going over this list of things that they do. And it kind of blew my mind. Like I was, looking for patterns and things. Luckily, I didn't really see much of that in my own wife, but I'd seen a lot of it in other people. So I saw a lot of the behavior that they were talking about in other people's relationships that were relatively bad. So obviously known people who had bad relationships. I've seen a bit of that. Obviously not the cause of all of it or all of the problems or anything, but I thought it was really interesting. And then the part that really blew me away was later on in the evening, my wife and I were watching 90 Day Fiance. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's just a show about people that go get engaged to somebody that lives in another country, and it's mostly a bunch of dysfunctional relationships. There's a couple in there that are semi-normal, but most of them, they're just kind of a little crazy. But when I was watching it, and after seeing that list, I was just constantly like, hey, that's like number 3. Oh, look, he's just doing number 6. And just watching the behavior play out after learning about it was just really eye-opening for me. And it made me kind of think, hey, I should learn more about psychology and other things. And I just kind of wanted to talk about it a little bit because I thought it was an interesting insight. I don't know that I've seen much of the psychopathy in the workplace, but I probably need to watch a video or two and see what that actually looks like, how that manifests, because I wouldn't be surprised if someone like, hey, somebody's psycho. And I was also looking like, I wonder if am I doing anything on this list? And I probably need to reevaluate a couple more times and just make sure that I'm not, right? Anyway, if you guys have questions about psychos, let me know. I thought it was interesting. I'd go check out his channel too. It's like I said, Dr. Grande. It's really cool. Interesting stuff. I just kind of binge watched after that. Let's go on to some more questions though and see if we got some Unity stuff. So, hey there, Jason. I'm a Unity programmer. I have been for several years. I want to try going into software engineering, doing remote work. Where do I start? So if you're saying you want to do non-game stuff, or do you want to do, I guess I'm not quite sure. If you're trying to do a transition into non-game development, you have to kind of pick something a bit more specific, like you want to do web stuff or you want to do enterprise type apps. A lot of the time it'll be like a company that you want to work with. But if you want to do it all remote work, I would find out what the opportunities are and look at that. But then you might also be saying that you want to do Unity stuff. So you can clarify that a little bit. Sorry, I know the questions are probably a little old because I've been blabbing a lot. But yeah, any more clarification you got, I'd love to hear it. Let's see. So somebody mentioned that you could do scripting with Lua in Unity, and that is definitely true. I've played with it a little bit myself. I wasn't a huge fan just because I'm not super fluent in Lua, and I haven't found it to be a really easy way to make game designers useful at it. If you wanted to do open modding, though, it might make a lot of sense, though, because Lua is relatively straightforward. But I think with C# stuff and Unity development, it's also pretty straightforward and powerful, but Lua is probably a better option. And you think about I think a lot of the modding systems, they just make it easy. So you want to make it as easy as you can. Let's see, more questions. Do you think that getting Unity certified programmer certification would be good for finding jobs? I'm self-taught programmer. I don't know. So in my experience, like at a game studio, the certification isn't really that important, and it's just because they know how to check and they kind of know what to look for. At a smaller place, though, smaller studio or a place that's doing non-game stuff where they don't have the full expertise to actually evaluate and trim down candidates, it can come in really helpful, especially for contract stuff with things like nonprofits and government. I haven't done it myself, but from what I've been told by friends who do it, there's a lot more emphasis on that kind of thing, and it helps just kind of push it up. It's also relatively cheap, and from what I understand, pretty easy to pass if you've been doing a lot of Unity stuff. So I don't see any harm in it, but I wouldn't expect it to make your job prospects just skyrocket or anything. So it's probably a good thing to do. Probably not going to be life-changing, but you never know. Okay, let's see. Somebody's asking about singleton patterns. I've done a couple videos on it, and I always kind of flip-flop back and forth on singletons. But I still use them. I don't particularly like them in most places because they're generally hard to test and relatively, they cause other weird issues, mostly with loading and unloading of them or state management or people not understanding what's going on with them. And the biggest issue that I have is just they make it harder to test. You can still do it. You just kind of have to do some extra work. But I use them anyway. So a lot of people say they hate singletons, and then you go look at their project and there's still some in there. Or they just switch to static variables or something. You're like, okay, you're still not completely solving the problem. It's a lot easier to solve that problem when you're doing web stuff because the payoff and the downside is very, very obvious and apparent. And if you come from a web world, the idea of using singletons without a very specific case, like you might have something that's instantiated as a singleton because it only needs to be, it's usually something stateless. But having stateful singletons is generally a very big no-no in the web world because obviously like you're hitting a different web server possibly every time you make a request, right? Or multiple people are at least. So makes it not scalable too. Anyway, let's look at some more questions. So awake, start, on enable, on disable. I get what they're for, but what should I call on them? For example, I have a player, health, and a health slider. Where should I call them? Good question. So awake is usually where it's set up some local state or local initialization. So put in things there that don't rely on any other components. I want to do awake stuff when I just don't expect to be able to find anything else or anything else to be instantiated in the game. So it's usually small. It could be like referencing something, maybe getting a component and caching that. Those kinds of things I'll do in awake. In start is where I'll put actions that have to maybe interact with other components or other game objects or have some data from other objects. On enable and on disable, I don't use them nearly as much. They're usually with something that's pooled or toggling state. So like I might have multiple components on my player for the way that it moves. Maybe I've got a running movement controller and a swimming movement controller, and I want to toggle them. I may do some different stuff in the on enable and on disable of those. I generally won't put much initialization type stuff there though, because that's what awake and start are generally better for. There's also an on destroy that can catch the destruction of things, where I'll put cleanup for that kind of thing, like event handling stuff. That's one other thing I guess I do sometimes do an on enable and disable is register and deregister for events. It's not something you want to do constantly, like if the thing's enabling and disabling over and over really fast, you obviously don't want to do that. But if it's going in and out of a pool or something, or there's some other reason that you want to stop listening to an event, then that would make sense. Like you switched a UI thing and you're no longer showing this UI, you're showing this UI, so you want to unregister the events or whatever the object is. It could be totally non-UI or whatever. So how to combat procrastination in game development? That's a very good question and a very hard one. The best thing that I've found for myself that doesn't always work, because I just don't always do it, is writing down a list of the things that I actually want to get done in the morning. So I'll put together a list of all of the important things that I definitely need to get done and get those done first. Just get the important stuff out of the way as early as possible. It doesn't help long term because it's still very easy to fail, and just not get around to doing it. Putting things up on the wall, putting up the things that you want to get done, listing those up. If you just put them right in front of your face so you're constantly seeing them, it helps me a little bit too. And the things that I write down, by the way, like they're on my desk. They're just sitting here. I've got them written down. It's like I got my notebook right here with the stuff that I want to get done today. So that, it's not great, not the best solution, obviously, but it's the only thing I've got, right? Yeah, I guess, and start off early. Like start, for me, what works best is if I not so much start the day like right when I wake up, but if I just avoid jumping into video games or random videos or other stuff when I get up, and just going like get up, get kind of energized, get motivated. A lot of people like to go work out first. I should probably do that, and then start actually going, like getting on it on your game. If it's a thing that you're doing after work though, it gets dramatically harder. Schedule a time, set yourself a budget of time where you're going to just focus on that. Somebody asked for a better TDD tutorial for Unity. I did do a couple videos on TDD, or I guess it wasn't really TDD, it was unit testing. So maybe I should do a TDD one, which is just test-driven development, which is the idea that you're writing tests first and the tests are kind of helping define the code. And that's somewhat what happens when I do my tests, but I don't really do it in a full TDD way. And I think it's partially just because I'm not good at it, but it'd be interesting to do. And if you're interested in unit testing, I have a lot of videos on that on the channel, and I'll probably do more, and I love to just blab about unit testing too. So if you have questions about it, feel free to ask. What do you think about Xamarin for creating cross-platform apps? I think it's great. I know a lot of guys that use Xamarin day-to-day on their jobs, and they build cross-platform apps. So they're building like iOS and Android, right? That's usually, when people say cross-platform, they mean they're making iOS and Android apps for the iPhone, basically for all the phones out there, 99% of the time. One benefit of Unity is that you can go a bit further cross-platform. Like you can build to just about anything. And I really just like the Unity ecosystem. But there's definitely some benefits to using Xamarin. If you're in an environment that already does similar type of work where you're doing something web or WinFormsy, or I guess WPFE, or something where Xamarin would really make sense, I would go with that first. If you're building an app that's very just data driven, you're seeing lots of data, digging through it, entering stuff, Xamarin might be a good fit. If you're really familiar with Unity though, and you're just a Unity dev that makes games normally, I'd go with Unity instead. Like, I mean, if I was going to build an app, I would be very, very unlikely to switch to Xamarin. Of course, if I was a Xamarin developer day to day, like I would be very unlikely to switch to Unity. Both of them can do the job. I just like Unity more. So how would, oh no, sorry, my chat just scrolled like a mile down. Let me see. What do we got here for questions? So how would one go about creating a DLC system for a Unity game? Nowadays, addressables. So there's an addressable system. It's built on top of asset bundles. It allows you to package up updates and bundles. You can publish those out to an S3 bucket or whatever remote storage you want, and then you give them access to download it. How you want to manage the actual licensing of that, I don't know, because I haven't had to build the DLC system, but I would bet that there are quite a few different ways to do it. You just have to check that they have the flag enabled, and then you grab the pack, and then you obviously only let them run the stuff if they have that flag enabled too. But it's not a very difficult thing to do anymore with the addressable stuff. I think with asset bundles and having to build a very similar system on top of it, it was really kind of painful and tedious, and not a lot of people did it. With the new addressable system, I'd be shocked if a lot of people don't get really comfortable and familiar with it fast and start doing these things. It's also good for like incremental downloads. So you can have a small download size, big project, all that kind of stuff, or doing updates. Let's see, as a junior developer, how do I politely tell a senior that his code sucks and we should rewrite it? That is a very good question. It's hard to tell people that their code is bad, and it's even harder to tell them that their code is bad and not get a negative response. So if your goal is to improve the code, instead of that, what I might recommend is start off with, I mean, it's going to depend on your project, but I would look at ways that you can start to slowly clean it up and implement some patterns and things that you can do to make it better incrementally. Instead of just trying to rewrite the whole thing, just refactor small portions and slowly make it better. Because you really, like, if you go in there and just say, hey, your code's shit, we need to delete all this and rewrite it, right? One, like, it's probably not going to happen. Like, it's not going to get deleted and rewritten because time and money and all the other things, right? And the sunk cost fallacy, like, hey, we've got this thing, we paid for it, we can't get rid of it, right? It's probably not going to just get deleted and rewritten. It's also going to cause serious problems with your direct relationship with those senior developers, especially if you're new in the area and you're not like really good friends with them, right? If you're really good friends with someone, it's a lot easier to say, hey, your code's not great. And you obviously would say it probably in a nice way. So I would say start with just refactoring, offer some ways to make things better and slowly push it. It's not an easy thing. Also, try doing a little bit of, if you can, pair programming with them, and don't present it as like, hey, I want a pair to try to make you better. It'd be like, hey, I want a pair to try to learn this better, understand the project better, and get better at it because you're the senior dev. And then as you're going through, you can recommend things. Like if you see an opportunity for some pattern and recognize, be like, hey, do you think that this pattern would work here? And if they're like, hey, I'm not sure, it'd be a lot easier way to start introducing these things and talking through them and getting their code up and better. It's not really hard. That's the thing. Like if you have a programmer whose code isn't great, it's not extremely hard to get them to write better code most of the time. The hard part is just explaining the deficiencies in the code in a way that makes sense to them and gives them an opportunity to do it a better way. I mean, my code's been terrible a million times. I've written tons and tons of really, really bad code, and you don't get better by people ignoring it, right? And just letting you keep doing it. And this is one of the things that the traps that I've seen, like I mentioned many times before, people fall into where they work solo by themselves in a job in a corner for too long, and they never really build up those skills because they're not getting any feedback. So that's the path I would take, at least. Let's see. Hello, Jason. How are you? I'm doing great. A little thirsty, as you might be able to tell from keep taking drinks. But if you have to choose only 2 skills for a game programmer, what might they be? Naming things right and understanding. I don't know what the second one would be. Naming things right. There are too many options, number 2, but just getting down naming. And maybe the single responsibility principle. I think if you can get those 2, like that alone makes a huge difference. Like that's going to make a bigger jump than anything else from the junior level. And it's relatively easy to understand and to learn. Like you don't have to have a lot of prior knowledge to understand that good naming is extremely important and hard to do. I got to find the... if anybody has a link to the stages of naming image, I saw it on Twitter again yesterday. Chris posted it, and it's great. It's just like 7 stages of naming or 9. I forget. I should have it up on my wall. I have it printed out somewhere, but I never put it up. It's great. Go for that. Name stuff well. Hey, Jason, really nice channel, learning a lot. How do you organize your code so that user input can only be read by one system? I set up some sort of an input controller setup. Make an interface for it and don't have anything access the input outside of that. So everything will read through the user input. Depending on the game, it could be bound to a player, like you got a 2-player local game or 4-player local game. You could have a player or an input per player that's maybe bound to their controllers or something. If it's just 1 per game, I mean, you still kind of have the same thing. You just have 1 player. Bind an input, set that up, and wrap all of the things that you want to read in there, and then read them through some like iPlayer input interface. And make sure that if you start to follow that pattern, you'll quickly find that you're not adding things in. But if you see somebody go add like input.get button down in a random spot, go in there and fix it. Change it right away, refactor it, and make it read from your common input system. It's something I highly, highly recommend. You generally don't want a bunch of things reading input. It's fine when you're in the beginning and the project is small. If it gets big and expands out, it becomes problematic because, of course, you have problems with refactoring, renaming things, and just not knowing where stuff is coming from. Let's see, what do we got here? Most useful design patterns for Unity development. Ooh. So Singleton is listed in there. I mean, technically, Singleton is often called kind of an anti-pattern. I would look at when I say that, but I mentioned before, I still use them, right? A lot of us talk crap about Singletons, but we still use them all the time, or sometimes. What I would look at is the Game Programming Patterns book. If you go to Game Programming Patterns, just Google it. He's got a bunch of patterns on there. I did a series of videos where I converted some of his C++ examples to Unity-related ones. But I would look at that because he does a good job of showing not just what some of those patterns are, but the use cases for them, where they make sense in a game and what kind of game they make sense in. Because the specific pattern is going to depend a lot on the game. Some games, it makes sense to use one pattern. Like some games, you might want to use a command pattern. Other games, makes no sense at all. So it just depends a lot on those games. And that game programming patterns book and the website. The website has all the book for free. You can go I grabbed it on Amazon too. But it covers a lot of those, and it covers them in the context of the specific games. I would check that out. Let's see. Why are game developers getting paid less than other developers? It's a good question. It's really for one key reason, and that's that game dev jobs just tend to be in higher demand and less availability. Just general supply and demand. There are more people that want to be game developers than there are game dev jobs. I think it's probably the opposite for normal programming jobs. There are insane numbers of web developer jobs or business apps. If you want to go build internal business apps at some big company, there are a lot of jobs for that, and there's not much demand. The people that are taking those jobs most of the time, outside of like the top tech companies, they're taking the jobs not because they're really into the tech, but just because it's a job and they can do it and get paid and whatever. And you'll see that a lot. Like if you watch a lot of YouTube channels about game devs, I was watching Josh earlier talking about the same kind of thing. Like people are going there, they're going there for the job. They're going to the interview for the job. At game companies, it's not the same, right? Like a lot of people go into game companies like they play the game. They know the games that company's making. They are fans of the people working there because they like the work that they've done, or they really just, the desire to work on the projects is dramatically higher. And it's a hobby and a passion. It's less of a career. So you will see that sometimes people get paid less. And that's partially supply and demand, like I said. It's also partially because since people are so excited for the jobs, they're willing to take a lot less. They're less likely to negotiate and try to, super chat just popped in. Cool, thanks. I'll read that as soon as I finish blabbing about this. But they're very excited to just go in there and work on the project. I mean, literally, I hate to say it, but I remember one of the first game dev interviews that I had, like, how much do you want to get paid? And I was like, to be honest, I would probably do this job for free if I could. And like, I thought that was a good answer because it was somewhat true and I was kind of stupid. And they're like, yeah, that's a problem. I mean, their justification was that like, you must not value your skills very high if you'd be willing to do it for free. But I think that, there are a lot of people that are kind of along that boat that kind of like would want to do the job. They would really enjoy doing the job. If they were independently wealthy, would do the job. I mean, like if I, suddenly, had billions of dollars come in, I would still probably just blab about game development stuff, play video games, and make video games, right? I might do it at a bigger scale, but I would still do that. If I'd never had to pay for anything ever again, I would probably just sit around, talk about video games, and make video games. Because that's kind of stuff that's fun to do. Not likely to happen with going to make web pages for some company that wants to sell something online, right? Okay, let me pop down to that super chat question real quick, and then I'll jump back up. Do you offer support for Patreon subscribers? I wouldn't say it's any special support. I just try to answer anything anybody asks me. People ask me stuff on Patreon or email or wherever. I appreciate the Patreon stuff. It's awesome. But I try to just answer everybody's questions. What's the best feature in the lightweight render pipeline? That's a good question. I haven't really used much of the lightweight render pipeline. I've played with it a little bit. I think it's now called the universal render pipeline. I actually want to dive a lot into it. It's just that all of the real projects that I have don't use that because they've all kind of kicked off before that, and they're using the old pipeline. Because the new one still, I don't even know if it's all the way out of beta. So I'm not sure, but I plan to do some videos on the new pipeline probably this month or next month. I want to go through a lot of the 2D stuff and the 3D stuff for it. Now let me scroll back up and try to catch up some more of those questions. Sorry guys. One of these days I'll get somebody in here managing the questions and just popping them up at me, right? Let's see. going through questions, build contact list. Where's a question mark? Okay, so here's one. Hopefully if I oh wait, somebody asked about marketing stuff. I have no idea about marketing stuff. I'm really terrible at that for marketing games, to be honest. There are a lot of people in chat though that have good answers to those, and sometimes at the meetups that we have, there are guys that are good at it. But marketing games is hard. Somebody was asking about ECS and making mono behaviors obsolete. I don't think that that's likely to happen. So it seems that the path that they're taking with ECS is integrating it in as kind of a core level and making it so that you can easily build mono behaviors and game objects just like you would normally, and then convert over to ECS. I wouldn't be surprised if that process even gets simpler and a lot of things just become ECS-y behind the scenes. Of course, I think that they're still going to have tons of control so that you can really optimize and make insane things that push the limits. But you also got to remember that like every game, almost every game that's out there, every Unity game that's out there pretty much was built without ECS. So it's not like you need it to build things that exist. It's more building things that we couldn't do before or improving performance dramatically so you can run on a lower profile. Both of those are great things to do, but I wouldn't worry about ECS too much just yet. Let's see, more questions. Okay, I was hired as a studio, by a studio as a junior game designer. Turns out I'm the only designer, and my boss wants me to be producer, designer, mix. Any tips for how to improve with that? That is super common. I see that a lot of the time with super small indie teams that have enough funding to maybe like, usually they're not super well funded, so they can't really afford a whole line of people to do all of the work. And they'll have the designer doing a lot of the management stuff, or a programmer doing the management stuff, or a programmer doing the design and management stuff. I would say try to embrace it and just get good at those things, because I mean you got in as a junior, but you're getting the opportunity. I mean, it might sound weird, but you don't have a whole lot to lose here. You're getting the opportunity to kind of manage and produce and have a lot more control over a project than you normally would. You're also at relatively high risk of failure because they're putting somebody who doesn't have the experience doing these things in charge of doing those things. And I mean, I've failed at it. I've seen a lot of people fail at trying to run a whole project on their own. But I would say take advantage of the opportunity and just work really hard at it. I mean, don't burn yourself out and hate it, but work hard at getting good at those other things too, because I hate to say it, but going in as a game designer only, it's a lot harder to get a job. If you have production experience, if you can say, hey, like, this is a game designer, and if you're the only one, you're technically like the lead game designer / producer, even if it's a small company, having that on there can at least get you into the door for whatever the next thing that comes along is, if this doesn't blow up into an amazing opportunity. And you never know, maybe it'll be like your calling. You find out like, hey, I'm really good at production and all this stuff. So that's my recommendation. I mean, you could also just quit and go try to find another junior game design job, but finding a game design job with no experience is not an easy thing to do. So I wouldn't say like, I would try to make it work and try to make it awesome if you can. Let's see, what else do we got? Oh, okay, cool. So he was asking about non-game stuff. Do you think Unity can create normal apps? I mean, not a game app. Yeah, I did a live stream about it last week too, and I've talked about this a couple times. I think it's definitely a great way to build apps. I built apps for different companies, different types of industries in Unity quite a few times. I know a lot of people who just do it full time. They just build apps as contracts and charge a lot of money. I mean, I don't know if I should dive into numbers, but I'm not going to talk about any of my own. I've talked to other people who make like $10, $15, $20,000 building apps that they can put together in 2 to 3 weeks, right? So they're relatively simple, and it's not like you do it the first time, right? But you get in the process of building these apps, you get used to it, you understand what those kinds of clients want, and you can make a lot of money building those kinds of things. And these are not games; these are just like business apps, like and an ad for some company to show a thing, or some company wants their own VR thing or their own augmented reality app. They'll pay a good amount of money, and you can build the thing a lot quicker than they would probably expect. Which makes them happy. Don't get me wrong. It's not like you're cheating them. You're making them excited because they're like, hey, not only was this only $15,000, but we got this awesome thing really quick. So can you please do a series on PlayFab? Yeah, I will. PlayFab's something that a lot of people ask about, so I'll definitely do that. Let me just write it down again. I think I have it in my list, but I'll put it on here again to make sure that I definitely don't miss it. PlayFab. By the way, that's a server hosting setup so that you can run logic and save data remotely without having to manage stuff as much. It's pretty cool. I don't have a lot of experience with it, but I know a lot of guys that use it in their real projects. So I'll bug them, get some advice, and then do some videos on it. Let's see. Some people asking each other questions, lots of chat. What's the best way to publish monetized games in China? I have no idea. The only thing I've ever had in China was lots of piracy. I don't know that I've had a lot of game sales there. Oh, I'm just thinking of like my Steam sales. And I look at Steam data. Sales in China were always relatively low. The rate that it converts down to was relatively low too. And the piracy was like all in China. I assume it's just because the games are just getting pushed up to some piracy sites in China that are popular and more popular than Steam. And I don't know how to publish to China, so I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I would say unless you have a very specific reason, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry. Let's see what else we got here. Questions. Is crunch normal practice in game dev? It is at some companies. So I wouldn't say that it is across game development. I know a lot of game devs. Some of them have crunched. A good number of them have had some crunch time. Some of them have had insane amounts of crunch time, and a lot of them just don't ever crunch. Or they did like a tiny bit once or twice, but that's it. And I would say that a lot of that comes down to project management, right? It's back to what we were talking about at the beginning. Crunch time is usually, it's a factor of lack of management or believing estimates and not understanding that estimates aren't real, right? Like it's the people overplan and underestimate how much time things are going to take. They'll figure that we're going to build all of these things, and we guess that these things are going to take about this amount of time, so we'll just mark it as that. You've got 2 weeks to do this system, 2 weeks to do that system, 2 weeks for that, 2 weeks for that. And then they don't realize, oh, wait, one of those systems is actually 6 weeks of work. Now, all of those other ones are behind, and they've given no time for testing it, updating it, iterating, and fixing things. Or you built this thing and then kind of get it out and realize that it needs dramatic major changes, and now everything else is behind again because there's no buffer time planned in there. There's no real fast adaptation. Also, I have to be fair, though, because some of it happens, and it more often happens with games that are going to console or bigger stuff where they have very set dates, and they pick these dates. They convince everybody to agree to these dates. Like, who's going to say no, though, right? And then they end up having to crunch because the date and the amount of work for the date was just dramatically off. And part of that is just, like most people, and I can't exclude myself from this, don't like to say no, right? They don't always say like, hey, can you do this, this, and this in this amount of time? The default answer is a lot of times just yeah, or probably, and probably becomes definitely, yeah becomes, of course we can, definitely, we can do that and more. People don't generally push back enough on timelines and deadlines, and people try to plan stuff out way too far in advance. If you've scheduled out your stuff a year in advance, you're just lying to yourself, right? I mean, you're wasting time lying to yourself, trying to detail out all of these tasks that you're going to do over the next year and how long they're going to take. It's just, it's a big way to waste time and kind of justify lots of nonsense. Right? So crunching, definitely not required everywhere. I wouldn't go in like if you're going into an interview and going like, "Hey, do you guys crunch often? Like, how bad is it?" But if it's like a crunchy bad place, you're gonna pick up on that just talking to people. So I wouldn't go in there like, and you also don't want to go in there being like, "Oh yeah, I'm never gonna crunch," because what people hear then is everybody else has to work hard, but I don't have to, right? And you got to think about it in the mind of the people that are interviewing you. There are other guys that are working with you that have been doing this and have been stuck doing this. So don't go in there like trying to fight back against it there. If you want to fight back against crunching, do it when you're in the job, or don't take the job if you think that it's that kind of position. And I wouldn't. Like if it's a position where they're constantly crunching and they're working 60, 80 hours a week, forced, right? They're not doing it because they're just obsessive. Yeah, don't take the job. By the way, we only have 34 likes. If everybody wants to hit the button, that'd be cool. I'm just looking at the data while I'm blabbing. Okay, let's see. Next one. How to reduce APK game size. I think there's some more above that, but I want to answer this one real quick. Addressables and asset bundles. So you can have them get a small download, and then they can pull in the extra data through bundles once it's loaded. The other thing to do though, before you do that, is do a build and look at the build output. So it puts all the data in a log, and it'll show you everything that's in your project, how much space it's taking up in order from biggest to smallest. You may find that you just have like one giant wave file in there that you didn't know was there that's eating up like 10 megabytes or something, or a texture that's oversized. So do that, clear stuff out first, and then if you still need to shrink it down, asset bundles with the new addressable system built on top is what I would go with. Any thoughts on using Godot versus Unity? Not really. I mean, I briefly looked at Godot. Seems kind of neat, but I don't really have a use for it. Unity is a giant engine with decades of, or at least a decade of lots of updates and lots of functionality and features, tons of info out there. I don't really see a benefit to switching to a new game engine yet. There might be some. I mean, I think that a lot of people that switch to new engines just do it because they're interested and they want to see how it works. They want to learn more about it and see what kind of cool stuff it could be. Sometimes they end up making games, but I don't think that that's going to be the majority of them. I still say that Unity is going to be by far the most popular game engine for quite a while. I don't anticipate that changing. And most popular makes it the easiest to use and fastest to get stuff done too, and easiest to hire people, right? Okay, so let's see, what other questions did we get? Mirror multiplayer tutorial. I might be able to do some sort of multiplayer tutorials. I've been avoiding them just because the networking stuff changes a lot, but maybe I'll do a local one and a network one sometime. Did you ever publish a mobile game? Yeah. None of them ever really took off though, so I don't talk about them too much. It was a long time ago too, back when mobile stuff was kind of coming out. Hey, I provided a question on unit testing in your community board you posted before the stream. My message. Oh, yes, I think I saw that one, and it was very long. And I didn't get to finish reading it right before I kicked off. Let me see if I can find that one. What was the question? Let me do a video about that one specifically because it's very detailed. Actually, can you send me an email? Because I want to go over that in detail. I think that it might actually make for its own really good video. So yeah, just send send me an email. I want to get your email address so I can just talk to you about it real quick. Because I think that would be a really good one. It's basically about interfaces and splitting things out and going towards MVC and where you should separate stuff out and where you should peel things off and should go into those patterns. Oh, I'd really like to talk about it, but I don't think I can do it justice right here. Let's see, what else do we have? Will I be a good developer like you someday? I assume so. I say anybody could become a good developer like me. Well, anybody who can do some basic, if you can understand code and you can understand logic, obviously not everybody can follow things logically, but if you can understand logically, you can be a good coder. I didn't get to be a good coder just magically or get to the point where I feel like I'm a decent coder. I would still say I'd probably rate myself like 7 or an 8 out of 10 when it comes to coding. But I would say that I got here by watching and learning a lot and asking people to tear my stuff apart, right? Like getting the biggest thing that helped me, to be honest, was showing my code to friends who were better programmers, showing it to them and having them tell me the truth, right? Because it's very easy to show your friend your code and they're like, oh yeah, that's good. Or show your coworkers code and they don't want to call you out, right? But if you just go in there and just be like, look, I think that this is probably bad. I think that there are probably a lot of ways that this could get better. And I really want you to just tear it apart. Like give it your worst. Tell me all of the things that you would change to make this better. Like how would you make this if you were doing it? That's a really good way to do it too. Just say, if you were building this, here's the thing I have, here's the code I have. How would you do it? And what you're going to find is that if they're a lot more experienced than you, it's probably completely different. And this happened to me. So I did this a couple times. One of the times with my buddy Matt, and I showed him some stuff, and I was like, have this problem. I can't quite solve it. It's getting really difficult. How would you do this? And his response was, well, I probably wouldn't code it like that. I would probably do it a little bit different. I was like, oh, okay. Can you explain? Elaborate, right? And he just started diving in and showing me more and more. We started talking more about design patterns, more about better separation. He gave me a ton of good recommendations on videos, books, and other stuff to read. And once I realized it, I saw that there was this opportunity, just dove right in, absorbed it, and just got obsessed with it. So I would go that route. If you want to get better at it, start showing your stuff to people that you think are better than you, that obviously that are going to have the ability to just give you feedback, like especially people that you're working with, and just be honest with it. Say like, hey, I don't think that this is perfect. I know there are problems, and I want you to tear it apart. And my daughter did this yesterday, or the day before. She sent me her papers, and she's like, literally like, tear it apart. Don't be easy on it. Like, go hard because I want it to be good, right? And that's the result that you get. If you just kind of be nice and don't tell them the truth, like it's going to be painful. But you have to wait until they're asking for it, because if you just go in there and say, hey, all this is terrible, you should do this the other way, and they didn't ask, they're not expecting that, it just feels like an attack. And they're going to feel like they don't even know what they're talking about. My code works fine. Like, I don't know why they're such a dick or whatever. So I hopefully that made sense and you guys all got the point. I'm going to try to keep up. Oh my God, so much chat. I'm so slow. Do you offer programming support with Patreon subscriptions? No, I just answer questions. I offer programming support to just about everybody as long as I have time to read and answer the email. So if you got questions, let me know. How do you feel about Unity's new course on performance by default? Dots and SRP seems like a game changer. Yeah, I'm, again, still not really concerned about dots taking over yet. I think that what's going to happen is it's going to slowly merge and morph over, that dots will be ingrained in all of the code. And dots is the data-oriented tech stack. It's just the stuff to make it so that we can manage memory and performance and really speed things up. I think that a lot of it is just that they're going to start implementing that at lower levels and make a lot of things that we already do faster. I don't think that they're going to completely change the game design or game development paradigm for everybody and just swap it out and be like, hey, here you guys go, like 2021, only use dots, or dots is the way to go. Because really, I mean, think of millions and millions of users and millions of users doing it one way. If you switch everything and instantly try to force everybody, it would be a disaster. They're a lot smarter than that. And you can see that in what they're doing now with their conversion stuff. They're really working on just making the engine better overall for everybody, and then giving the opportunity to really go above and beyond if you really want to push the limits. Okay, let's see. I see a lot of your tutorials on Unity Learn Premium. I don't think so. None of my tutorials should be on the Unity Learn Premium. So if you see them there, they're probably theirs are not mine. They're getting mixed up, I think. How do you feel? Okay, I answered that one. Let's see what else we got. What do you think, what type of game or genre new devs should make so they were able to finish their first project? Okay. First, don't make something where you're trying to design the fun. The first game that you make, like, don't try to go in there and figure out what's fun. Just remake stuff, right? Remake a couple different games so that you can get that process down and get used to it. And when it comes to actually what game to make and release, once you are at that point where you think you can actually build it, finish it, and ship it, no clue. I really don't know what to recommend. I would say don't build like an MMO. Try to remember the scope and scale, and I would go with something that you can build and release relatively quick, and just go through that process a couple times ideally. Like if you can build and release a game in 3 months, do it a couple times and just get used to it, and then do your big one, right? Fail a couple times, get practice. Maybe one of those takes off. You'll learn a lot from that process of going out there and just releasing things. Let's see. What other? Somebody mentioned mob programming. Again, highly recommended. If you haven't seen the mob programming show channel on YouTube, check it out. It's really cool. Chris does it. They talk about mob programming and the benefits of it. It's really awesome. It's hard to tell unless you've actually seen it in person, though. When you see it in person, it's just amazing. Okay, let's see. What other questions? Trying to scroll down and look for question marks. Okay, it just popped down to the bottom again, and the bottom question was, is an i5 processor good for programming or an i7? You code on anything. You could code on a Core 2 Duo or just about anything. If you want to do Unity stuff, I mean, an i5 will be totally fine. Obviously, the faster you go, the better, but I would put a little bit more focus on a fast solid-state drive and making sure that you have at least 16 gigs of RAM. So if your options are i5, fast SSD, and 16 gigs of RAM, or i7 and not that, go with the i5. It's CPU heavy, like they're mentioning, but it's also very hard disk heavy, especially if your project gets bigger. So I really love the Samsung 970 EVOs, and they keep dropping in price. They're still not cheap, but they're really, really fast, and it makes a huge difference with Unity startup and importing small assets, right? Although with the new setup, that might be less of an issue because they're making the incremental loading of all the assets and importing. Let's see, were there other questions? I think there were, but I've kind of lost my place. So if you got another question, just drop it down below, and I'll just keep going from there and try to keep up. Could we use scriptable objects as singletons? Yes, you can. I've seen that quite a few times. People use scriptable objects as singletons. And then what you do is you create the scriptable object in your project view, and then you reference that in your scenes and or prefabs so that you can, you're always referencing back to that one singleton. And I saw a video about that 2 years ago from Unite, where they talk about basically building an entire game that way. And then another guy at a local meetup did a really cool talk about how his system that he has for building games, it's very similar with scriptable objects, where you use it as singletons and other things for settings, all kinds of stuff. Let's see. Coded on a potato laptop. Let's see. I recently graduated, struggling to find a job. How should I proceed with getting into the industry? That's a good question. I highly recommend meetups. So if you have them in your area, go to meetups, talk to people. There's always somebody hiring at meetups, or at least at the ones in the area that I'm in, and pretty much all of them that I've been to. I've been to a couple in different areas, and there are pretty much always somebody there hiring. There are people there that know about jobs, and you're going to make contacts and build up friends. Don't go to one and assume, hey, like I went to one, I didn't get a job. That's it. Go back, start building up those relationships. People will refer jobs to you, and I refer jobs to people that I've met at meetups nonstop. A lot of the time. In fact, that's one of the default places I go. If somebody's like, hey, I got this job and I know I can't do it, I'm like, hey, who do I know from the meetup that's available looking for work and I think can get the job done? So that's what I would recommend. Let's see. My goodness, chat goes fast. Your course is around 6 months salary here. Are there any discounts coming soon? Shoot me an email. We'll talk about it. I can figure that out. Where can we see your games? There's a bunch on Steam. Did a bunch of VR games on Steam. I think they're linked on the main page too. And another one of them was up there. Had to work on Vanguard and EQ2 and Pantheon. Even have my old Sigil hoodie on because I got cold. It's fun stuff. Let's see. What language should I learn to make a game? C#. Definitely. Is my beard is glorious. I guess. I just don't like to shave. Really, like it grows out because I don't like to shave. My hair is pushed back because I moved and I didn't want to drive to the old hair cutter or find a new one yet. I got to find a new barber in the area. I don't know about you guys, but going to the little pop-up places is like 50% chance my head's going to be terrible. So I got to find a good barber and yeah, get a big beard because shaving is a pain in the butt. Well, and it just adds authority, right? I feel like it makes me look a little bit smarter. And get some glasses next. Let's see, what else we got here? List of priorities in chronological order for Unity outside of Unity, such as vectors and math. I would say just get into Unity. Like if you want VPN and it's trying to reconnect again. Hopefully that doesn't kick me off again. Okay, let's go back. Where was I? What was the question? I lost it. Somebody asked what camera I'm using. It's the Logitech Brio, the 4K one. Although I would like to get a better one because while it looks really nice, the focus is kind of a pain. Let's see. What was where did I end up? I was blabbing about my beard. Oh, languages to make a game. Yeah, C#, and then how to start. Like I said, just start making games. Don't bother too much learning about theory. Don't bother too much learning about other stuff. Just get into the actual game development. Eventually, you're going to run into problems. Those problems can be solved by learning the 3D math, by learning other things outside of just the actual coding. But don't try to dive into those first, because what happens is you learn something new and you want to find a way to use it, right? It happens to all of us. We figure out something and we're like, hey, how do we use this? Not realize that like a lot of the things that you're going to learn outside of just building games are already solved problems in the editor, in the engine, and you're just going to be reintroducing or trying to resolve problems that are already solved, and you're not really focusing on what you need to do. So just build the games. Don't worry about other stuff yet. Start coding right away. And do that with tutorials, guides, go through a couple simple games first, try to understand the flow. And then when you have questions like, I don't understand what this class means, or what's the difference between public and private? Why am I putting this there? If you don't know those things, like start searching, start asking the questions as you're going through it. Let's see, how many games in Steam have I published? It's like 6 or 7. How do I know that I'm ready for a coding job? You don't really. Like, you just have to go out there and do it. And a lot of the time, what you'll find is once you're actually doing it, you'll realize, hey, I was way more ready for this. I could have done this, a year ago. Like, I'm better at this than I thought. I've seen this for a lot of programmers. Like, they get started, they get a project, and they're like, I did it. Like, I was able to complete it. I built it. Like, I didn't think that would be that easy. And it is. Like, because what we see like out in public and what we see for most projects is like the super advanced high-end stuff, right? We see the stuff that Google is doing or the games that are being made by these giant multi-billion-dollar companies, and we think like, how do I do that? That's not what most programming jobs are. Most programming jobs are relatively straightforward, not too complicated. It's, hey, can we get this thing to do this and not do that? So I would say you never really know for sure until you're doing it. So just go apply. And I think that applies for everybody. I've seen this a lot. A lot of people are just afraid to apply for jobs because they don't feel like they're qualified enough. They don't feel like they're good enough or whatever. Or there's a list of requirements on there and they don't meet all of them. My general rule, and I think the best rule is, if you look at the requirements on a job application, if you think you can do about a third of them, and like it's the primary ones ideally, apply. Like just go for it, because the worst thing that's going to happen is somebody's going to look at your stuff and say, no, thank you. Like that's it. They're not going to get angry. Nobody's going to come burn your house down. You're not going to get blacklisted. Like just, they're not going to take it. But a lot of the time, and the reason that I say this is because a lot of the time job requirements are nonsense. Like they list all of the things that they do now, or some of the things that they do now, all of the giant lofty goals that somebody has that maybe we would like to do, or the, hey, what do you think we should add to this stuff? Because they didn't feel like they had enough on their list. So job requirements most of the time are pretty bad, right? Like, I mean, it's why you see junior developer require 4 years of experience type things, right? Like, okay, because people aren't thinking these things through. So just apply. Make sure that you have a good resume, though. Format it right. Don't have bad info in there. Don't have spelling mistakes or screwed up formatting. I mean, if you can't format your tabs right in a Word doc, how am I going to trust you to format, the game UI, right? It's as simple as that. Like, put in work to make sure that your applications or your resumes and portfolios are as good as you can make them, and then submit them. Don't be afraid to apply for stuff. Also, when you apply for things, personalize stuff for them. So if you have a resume with a bunch of stuff on it, and there are skills specific to the job, maybe you're applying for a augmented reality job. Move your augmented reality stuff near the top, right? Get that stuff at the top of your skills. Focus on those things and feature them more. If you have AR experience, feature that more. Again, and do that for every job, like, because you want to make sure that you're showing them the value that you bring them. And it's like, sometimes I think people feel like they're lying by doing this, and you're not, right? Like, your skills aren't in a ranked order of I'm best at this and I'm the worst at this, right? They're in just somewhat random order usually. And what you want is to show your skills in the order that they matter to the person that's hiring you, because they might not care at all that source control super well, Git, Perforce, SVN, and who knows what other ones. They just want to know that you know the one that they have, or they just want to know that you know virtual reality stuff or whatever. So get those things to the top. Okay, let's see. Let's go on. When would you use an abstract method over a virtual method? I use abstract method when you want to have a base implementation of something, or you want to force. So we want to have a base implementation of it. Is usually it. When I want to have some implementation that's used across everything, or I want to force them to implement it. I guess I should do a video on. I did a video on this. I should link it because I think it'll explain it a lot better than I can in my rambly state right now. Do you suggest program game by AI by example book for beginners? I don't think I've read that. I should check it out. Sorry. And yeah, somebody mentioned the Unite 2017 Austin talk. That was for the Singletons scriptable object stuff. If you're interested in that, check it out. I played with it a lot. I never really found it to be a good setup for the stuff I was doing, but I could see games and studios where it makes sense, where you have more design stuff and a lot of designers doing a lot of that work. It totally makes sense for those. Or there are probably a lot of other scenarios. Like I said, the guy that did the talk on it, he was a programmer, and he just did it because he felt like it was a good way to build games. So, and he's probably right. All right, let's see. What else we got? I recommend any channels, books, blogs about programming, enemy AI, or AI in general. No, I should. If anybody has a recommendation for it, please let me know. Also, I just realized that chat disappeared, so I need to refresh this page. Sorry. Let's see if the chat shows back up. I realized I wasn't seeing any new chats because I had been disconnected from it, so there's pages and pages more of chat. Sorry, guys. I'll keep it up and keep going. Let's see. Did I miss the psychopath portion? Yeah, we were just talking about this doctor's psychos. He had a video that popped up on YouTube. It was Dr. Grande, and it was about how to tell if your wife is a psychopath or signs that your wife is a psycho. It was very interesting. I started binging and just going crazy on it and watching a lot of stuff about psychopaths and recognizing some psychopaths out there. Like, hey, I see some traits now and I'm starting to notice them. And then watching some TV shows and seeing them like one after the other. I'm like, man, this lady like just fits every single one of the things that he listed, just back to back to back. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. Like, this poor kid should run, right? Anyway, that was me watching 90 Day Fiance with my wife, right? After all these videos. But if you're interested in psychology and all that stuff, I would definitely check it out. Another thing on that subject, by the way, I know this isn't game related, but if you're interested in psychology type stuff, which I wasn't until last week, there was a video series. If you look up, just search for Stanford Evolutionary Biology, you'll see it. It's like a 28-piece series on evolutionary biology, how it ties into humans, how your brain controls your body, body controls the brain, all of that stuff. I thought it would bore me to sleep and knock me out, so I turned it on like, midnight, and ended up staying up till like 3 in the morning, just watching, binging nonstop. And I've been going through it constantly since then. It's really good and interesting. And another one of those things I never would have thought I'd be interested in, but it's a Stanford lecture with millions of views because it's really, really good. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, check it out. Let's go back to game code though. Let's see. What do we have for questions? Great if you make a series on Unity scripting advanced level, because Unity advanced level programs are more. Yeah, so when you're talking about making a series on advanced level scripting, the hardest part there is that a lot of the more advanced stuff doesn't make sense until you get into a more complex project, right? If you start to put together advanced systems and patterns and you do them in a smaller scenario, it really is. It's overkill, right? You're doing the wrong thing. You're over-engineering and overbuilding it. So doing samples where you show a lot of the advanced stuff gets really hard without something that's extremely long and in-depth. But I do agree, like having more of that stuff is very good, and showing how to get that into a project is something I'd like to do more of as well. So I have knowledge of object-oriented programming, how interfaces, classes, polymorphism work, and I know Unity well. If I send you my project, can you tell me the quality of my code? I might be able to. Yeah, and I mean, I did a series of code reviews. They're still up there. I'd like to do more of them eventually. They just take a while, but if you have something that can be released publicly, the code can be shown publicly, and you're okay with that, so let's bring back into focus. Let me know. Shoot me an email, just jason@unity3d.college, and maybe we can check it out. It'd be cool. Let's see. What other questions did I have here? Don't worry about my games on Steam, by the way. I ended up selling all those off, so I don't even own them anymore. But they are fun. Don't get me wrong. Like, they're cool and all, but don't grab them just because I made them. Like, how to write more sophisticated code with generics, delegates, and stuff. That's another thing. You want to watch out too and make sure that you're not doing it just because it's a new thing that you know how to do, right? Like, it's a trap that I've fallen into myself, where I first learned how to use events and went way overboard, overcomplicated, and confused myself. And then the same with generics. I think the first time I learned about generics, I got super excited, went a little overboard, and built things that I didn't need, overcomplicated and confused things. So what I would do is look for problems, right? When you see problems that you have in your code or problems that you need to solve with your game, see if those work as solutions to the problem. Don't necessarily grab a solution and look for the problem. Try to find the actual problems and then find the best solution for them. Now, if you want to just get better at using those things, do some example, simple projects. Like, put together some projects where you're going to think in that way and just use that thing. And then one of the things you might notice is when you design yourself into a hole and start causing those problems, you'll see what the problems are, what they look like, and how to avoid that. And it might give you a better insight into what not to do as you're going forward too. Let's see, what else we got here? Questions. Let's see. I'm literally just scrolling down looking for question mark right now. How to reduce battery usage on mobile apps. Performance. You got a profile, so you need to get down your frame time as low as possible. Minimize the CPU work, minimize the GPU work. It's really just all about optimizing. That's part of what DOTS is there for, but if you're not already past all the other optimization stuff, DOTS is not the next step. Like, first you want to optimize everything. And it's not easy, but you need to get familiar with the Unity profiler. And anybody that hasn't used the profiler, check it out. Like, just go window profiler. It's there. It's free. It's built into Unity. You don't have to do anything special. And it's going to show you what's killing your game, what's causing performance problems. And it's going to show you like exactly what line, how long it's taking, how much how many times it's getting called. For the very specific details, you want to turn on the deep profile option. It's a little button in there. So just hit that, stop, play again, look at the data. You'll see every frame, how long everything's taking, and exactly what's happening. Best way to profile and just fix stuff up. Let's see, what else we got here? Yeah, something talking about junior devs with 2 to 3 years experience and 2 released games. Yeah, that's if you've released 2 games, you're probably past that junior part. It is possible to be a junior developer with 2 to 3 years of experience. Usually this happens because they're a junior developer in a place where there's not a lot of mentorship going on. There's not a lot of learning going on, and they're just kind of left on their own to build up. It's very easy to get in the scenario where you see a lot of developers who've been doing the job for a couple of years, but you would still consider them junior. And then there are a lot of scenarios that I've seen where I see interns that I think are senior developers too. And those are more of the collaborative environments where they're doing more mob or pair programming and working together a lot more so that the newer developers are getting good like the senior developers, which is something I would highly recommend. Again, why I recommend Chris's Mob Mentality podcast. So how do you recommend creating a plugin system? That's a good question. That was the one you asked earlier, right? So I would go with the asset bundles and addressables. I don't know that I can go into a whole system for it, but that might be just a good video. Let me put that on my list too, and just build like a simple plugin one. I'll make sure enough people are interested in it, but I think it could be fun. It's just like a plugins and extensions type thing because it's not super complicated, and it can get super complicated, but I think the fundamentals of it aren't too hard. I'll do that, or I'll queue it up at least. Let's see. What were these other ones? Let's scroll up a little bit. Is it all? Yeah, it's probably, there are very few females that watch my channel. Like just looking at the YouTube analytics. So if you're here trying to meet a girl or something, very unlikely, right? It's like 2 or 3% female. But I think that, I don't know why that is exactly, but it's less like that in game companies, in bigger game companies from what I've seen. And it could just be completely, the little bubble that I've been into. But I wouldn't say a lot of female coworkers, but a lot more than like what you would see represented here. It was a lot more than 2%. It was probably like 20 to 30%. It's just still low, but I don't know if that was all. My best guess is that when I was a kid, a lot of boys grew up just playing video games, and a lot of the girls didn't. I think that that's totally changed now since mobile devices became more popular and just kind of ubiquitous. Like I think that girls are gaming just as much, but I think that when I was growing up, it was pretty much all boys. We were just gaming and playing games kind of made for boys at our friend's house, right? We'd go play console, we'd go play Nintendo or go play Sega Genesis or Super Nintendo or whatever the thing was. He just really like a lot of the old Nintendo, playing a lot of the games. And I think that kind of probably bred a lot of the excitement to make games in a generation of boys and not so much in the girls. But I think that's, like I said, changing dramatically, and there are probably more girls playing games now, and eventually I wouldn't be surprised if that switched over to more girls making games. There's no real reason they couldn't. So can you make a video on physics limitations and Unity joints? I don't know. I don't think I'd be qualified on that. Like physics joints are not something that I feel like I'm an expert level at, or kind of medium. Maybe though, maybe something interesting to get better at. That's one of the things I like to do too, is find stuff that I'm not super good at and then do videos on them, because it forces me to learn the stuff in detail before I do. Oh, good. And somebody mentioned there are a lot of girls at the university. That's probably true. Like I said, I think that it's changed a lot just because girls are growing up playing games now. There is a Discord server. Somebody asked that. I can probably post a link. Let me find it. It generally goes out automatically for everybody on Patreon, but I'll just drop a link in chat real quick too. You just don't get the cool fancy color and stuff. Where is it? There we go. Sorry, just copying the link. Whatever. It lasts for a day. So if you're here live, there you go. There's the link. I just dropped it in chat. Okay, let's see what else. Get a couple more questions here. Wow, okay. All kinds of stuff. So should I go with HDRP if you're building a PC game or Universal? If you're building a PC game, depending on the game type, probably HDRP. So if you want to do something super HD, like you want to do realistic stuff, that's probably the way to go. It also depends on your art team and your art direction in general. If I'm making a game like Frogger, should I bother with a game engine at all? Yes, definitely. Don't use WinForms or Visual Studio. Go straight to a game engine. You could build Frogger in Unity in a day. If you wanted to go build it from scratch in something else, it's going to take dramatically longer. You're going to re-implement all of the things a game engine does, and it's going to be a nightmare. A waste of time, really, because nobody cares about a game built in something else. People just care about the game, whether or not it's good and fun. It's very, very rare that somebody gives a damn what engine the thing was built in, unless they're a game developer. Can you do a video on practical integration tests? Probably. I don't do a whole lot of integration testing right now. Do a lot of unit tests, much less on the integration tests, but I would like to do one on it eventually. I don't know that I'll do it soon, though. I probably need to spend a bit more time on them. And the integration tests that I would be putting together right now are at like a MMORPG scale, so it might be a little bit different, but I think I could probably do something like that. Where would you publish your first game? Everywhere. So if you have a game that can go to any platform, put it on any platform. If you're not sure what platform to go for, pick one that has lower competition, like where you can get in and be one of a few developers ideally, or one that just makes the game that you want possible, depending on the kind of game. Let's see. Somebody's asking about game dev salaries and just making a video about them in general. Yeah, I could probably do that. And to be honest, like I think we talked briefly about game devs getting paid less, but not all game devs get paid less, right? There are a lot of game developers who make a lot of money. And in general, once you get past that junior getting your foot in the door phase, or if you're just doing code in general, your pay is not going to be bad. And it's going to get dramatically better. I know plenty of like top level game developers, game programmers who are in the multiple $100,000 a year range. So it's not like it's impossible, and they're not in Silicon Valley either, right? They're out in, I don't want to spoil the places, but other places that are not like, they're not Google type money places. And there are plenty, like if you're a game programmer in the United States at least, and you're at a senior level, easily well over 100,000. It's not a hard job to get good salary at. It's just hard to get good salary when you're starting because you have no experience, and there are a ton of other people competing that also have no experience. Once you've built up that experience and get a couple connections, it's dramatically easier to get the jobs that don't pay terrible. And it's also not hard to come in as a junior developer making like $70,000 or $80,000. And I wouldn't say not hard, but it's not unheard of. Like I've seen plenty of that. Like, I've also seen plenty come in at 30,000 though. So it varies a lot. And I'm talking totally Southern California numbers. It's going to vary obviously dramatically from state to state and country to country. So I'm talking basically West Coast United States numbers, because it'd be the same all the way up to Washington or Oregon or whatever. Well, maybe not Oregon. It's pretty empty. Okay, let's see. What else you got for questions? Do you have a C# course? I have a GameDev course. It's up on game.courses. It does C# stuff, but it's not just C#. 2 or 3%. There's still a chance. That was on the percent of females. Yeah. Let's see what else we got here. Also, if you're new to just Unity development, I have a free course up on YouTube. Just look at it's in the playlist. Just scroll through. There's a picture of a dragon bouncing up and down. I taught it to 5th graders. A lot of them were able to comprehend it and understand and expand on it. Some of them went beyond and added extra things to it. So if you're interested in just getting started and you want to do it, that's what I would recommend. The first video is like a minute long, and then it just kind of goes from there. It's only like an hour worth, but you should be able to finish the whole thing in 2 to 3 hours and have a game that you can deploy out online, which is really cool. What else we got here? What do you think about a No Man's Sky-like game? I think that it's interesting and huge. I'm not a huge fan of procedural generated games just because I really like the handmade content better most of the time. And I've spent a lot of, not a lot, I've spent some time building procedural generation stuff for games. And I always find that it takes a lot more energy and effort to get that good than it does to just build stuff out. Now, No Man's Sky, it's supposed to be, endless, infinite. So I understand, like, the whole point is that. But it's just not the kind of thing that I get super excited about anymore. I would have a long time ago, but I've seen enough procedurally generated things that, like, I just tend to find them less interesting than the handcrafted stuff now. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Imposter syndrome. Yep. Let's see. Oh, somebody mentioning that HDRP only works if you have the right video cards, which, yeah. I guess I'd never even considered that. If you have depending on your system, you might not even be able to use it. Interesting. I forgot that people have computers without cool video cards. The bubbles, right? kind of fall into. So should I quit college or do I need a diploma? I have no idea. I know that my college degree had zero value for me. I got a degree in electronic engineering, so I don't even remember. Something I learned how to make circuits and stuff. I found out that the only part that I liked in my entire college was the coding, and I already knew how to code a bit. And then I just I never did anything with the electronic stuff, so I don't know. And went straight into code and learned all the coding on my own. If it's somebody that's looking at starting a coding job with no experience and deciding whether they want to go to college, though, that's I think a different scenario. And I don't know the best solution for that. I think you can definitely learn all of the stuff that you need without going to school, and it's definitely possible to do it dramatically faster. I don't know that everybody can, though. I mean, I know that a lot of the best programmers I know happened to be self-taught. And a lot of that was that they started before they would have even gotten to a point where they would go to college. Like, by the time they got to the point where they would go to college, they knew how to code. They'd been building things a little bit on their own. They weren't like pros. They were like junior programmers. And they had the option of get a junior programming job or go to college. And the ones that chose get a junior programming job are generally better programmers. Like, this is literally just out of the small bubble, the small percent of people that I've met. And I think that part of that is that when you're doing the job and you're working on it, you're going nonstop. That's all you're doing. You're just focused on coding, right? And you're doing it with requirements and constraints and demands. When you're going to school, it's very easy to get distracted. You're going to have all kinds of other classes that are unrelated, and you're not going to be as focused on the programming side. You're going to learn a lot of other useful things and get some extra value there, I'm sure. But I think it's easier if you're 100% focused. Now, it might make boot camps really good for that too. I don't know. I've never been to one, and I don't know anybody really closely that's been to one and told me about it at least. So I'd be curious. Do I sleep? Yeah, probably too much, really. Well, what I do is I just don't get up until like 8 in the morning, 9. Sleep in the morning. Let's see. What else? Somebody mentioned they're an experienced developer with no pro game experience. Should they send their resume to dev houses? Yeah, send it out. Just get going on it. Don't. It's funny because I was watching Passion of the Nerd again today, and the video that I talked about last week was that toolbox one. Like, don't wait until you have everything together to start applying and trying to get jobs. Try to get the jobs now. If you run into problems and you run into blockers, beat those blockers down. If you need a portfolio, get that portfolio done. I would probably put up a portfolio just because it's easy. But if you don't have anything to show there, and that becomes a blocker and you really can't get in, then do it. But try to get the jobs right away. Don't wait. Don't delay, because I mean, really, like, job opportunities don't last. Like, we don't have a job opening that's up for like 3 years. It's going to be totally different jobs when you go apply if you wait, another 6 months or a year or whatever. So just keep going and apply. Don't wait. I mean, build games while you're doing it, because it's fun to build games and it's good practice and it'll give you stuff to do. But don't stop yourself from applying until you've done that, is, I guess, the point. How do we give real life AI behavior to our characters? That is a very complicated thing. Yeah, not easy at all. There's a lot to it, a lot of different ways you can do it. You can set up a simple state machine. I mean, most AI really is just a simple state machine. A lot of the time, people overestimate what's really going on in AI. It's usually a state machine that just goes like, hey, when this thing happens, switch to this state and go do that thing. And then maybe a little bit of randomness in there to mix it up and make it seem like, oh, this thing has a weird personality, because sometimes it goes and does this other thing. So most of the time, it's just going to be that. If you want something more complicated, you could get a lot more complex, but that's what they usually tend to be. Machine learning stuff, somebody mentioned it too. It could be really cool for AI. In the end, I just haven't figured out a way to make it make sense yet, or get good at it yet. Something I want to get into though. What about using autonomous boots to collect statistics about game FPS? I'm not sure what that means. I'm going to go on to the next question. If you can clarify a little bit though, it'd be interesting. Do you use UniRX extensively in projects, just for UI or gameplay stuff? No, I don't. Just because I think if I'm working on a project that's using it and the whole team is using it, cool. If I'm working on a project that's not, though, I'm not going to try to just implement it. It's a pretty big paradigm shift, and the developers who use it and love it tend to love it. When I've shown it to other developers that don't use it in their design, okay, it doesn't make sense to them and it gets hard to mix in. It is something that I think is really useful and interesting for developers coming from outside Unity too, though, because it brings in some of those patterns. And that's the UniRX. I think it's supposed to be like Unity reactive extensions. Kind of adds a lot of binding and eventing type stuff in there. It's pretty big and pretty cool system. I'm not a pro at it by any means. Somebody asked if they're late. Yeah, I'm actually getting ready to wrap this up in just probably a few minutes. Yeah, and somebody's mentioning that a lot of time teachers aren't in the industry when you're learning, and that's true. I mean, it's rare that you're building games and teaching stuff, which is literally like why I like to do contract stuff and keep working on projects, because I feel like if I'm trying to teach things and I'm not building stuff, eventually my skills are going to get out of date and I'm not going to know about new problems and things, not going to run into those things and stay as fresh. And that can definitely happen with school. Like, you go to college, it's always possible that the person you're learning from is teaching you what worked 20 years ago, and not necessarily now, or teaching you problems that you needed to solve constantly 10 years ago, but now are just, pre-solved and not what you're actually going to be doing day to day. Again, there's still plenty of other value there, lots of other stuff you can get out of it, but that all does make sense. What else we got for questions? See, anything else? Can we ask any question here? Yeah. Yep. Go ahead. Mostly Unity stuff, but if you got something else, feel free. And what do you think about user-generated content in games? I think it's really cool. I think it's a way to make a game that would not be successful suddenly be a giant hit. I think it's a way to make a game that has a really, really long lifetime, and a way to make it's really just a way that a small team or even a solo developer can make a giant mega hit, right? You make this game and then you have all these people constantly creating content for it and making your game better. But it's not an easy thing to do. It's something you really have to plan for. But yeah, I like it. I would say do it if you can, if it fits in your game. It's also possible to just fall into that trap of, I want to make this game and I'm expecting my users to make everything, so I'm just going to make this boring, bland thing and then expect that people are going to build on top of it. Don't do that. Get a core game down, get it fun, and then try to figure out how users are going to make that better. Is anybody else looking forward to Unity's new input system? I am personally, but when I last time I dove into it, I wasn't a huge fan of the setup process and the complexity. It felt a little too complex. I get the sense that they're making it easier to use and simplify as they get closer to the final release, though. So I think once it's done, it'll be, I mean, definitely it's going to be a dramatic improvement versus reading string inputs, right? So it'll be cool. It's just going to take a little bit of time for them to get it nice and smooth and easy to use, I think. Okay, working on an RTS game, does it make sense to divide units into two lists, selected units and unselected units? Not necessarily. So what I would do in that scenario, if you have an RTS and you've got a bunch of units, the units would all be controlled in some class that's like a unit manager. It may have a list, dictionary, whatever, some data structure in there, probably a list that's holding all of the units in it. Might be a dictionary with some key that I need to look them up by, though. Excuse me. And then I would have a selection class, so a class that's dealing with selecting them, and it would have its own list of the selected units. It wouldn't necessarily need to know about all of the units. It just needs to know about the selected ones. And I would set it up that way so that I had like a unit selection controller type thing. And then as I select units, that thing gets notified, hey, go select this unit. The player wants to select this thing. And I would do it that way. Instead of having two separate lists that are like selected and unselected, I'd have an all units and then a selected list that's on a totally different class to keep that separation of concerns away. Just kind of keep your code as small and clean as possible. Did you see the recent Unity Humble Bundle? Yeah, I grabbed another copy of it. I had a lot of the things in there, but it was $15 or $20, and it seemed like a really good deal. So I grabbed another copy, got a couple extra keys, and yeah, it looked good. I mean, I think Doozy UI is enough for it, but there were a lot of other cool things in there. Are you developing a game now? Yeah, the one I'm working on is Pantheon. If you go to pantheonmmo.com, you can see it. It's an MMORPG, though. Yep, somebody said they'll send some projects. Could you give feedback? Yep, just shoot them over to me at an email. Just jason@unity3d.college. Somebody had a problem with their certificate. I don't know. Let me check that out. This is from the course. It sounds like it bugged out. There was just I got an email a couple days ago and another one that the site did an automatic update. Maybe it broke something in there. I'll check that out. Thank you. When starting out, how do I keep my game from turning into a big, bloated, laggy mess? Profile and test relatively common or often. So I wouldn't do it nonstop. Like a lot of times people will get in the habit of just profiling everything constantly and just getting obsessive about it. But while you're going through things, watch for issues, profile a little bit, look for slowdowns, and see what the things are that are bad and just cut them out. And constantly, what you want to do is when you're going into code, leave it better than when you got there, right? It's the Boy Scout rule. You want to leave the place better than when you came there. So when you get into your code, don't leave it a mess when you're done with it. Like write the code, clean it up, and if you get in there and you see an issue, try to clean it up and fix it if it makes sense. And also delete crap. Don't import a bunch of assets that you're not using. This is something that I see people do constantly, and I used to do it all the time, and it was just a big mess. But what you want to do is only import the stuff that you're going to use. So a lot of the time, if I don't know what I'm going to use exactly in an asset pack, I'll open up a new empty project, I'll import the package, I'll figure out the parts that I need, and then export that to my own little package so that I can pull it in. Or if it makes sense and it's easy enough for me to understand, I'll just go into the other Unity editor and pull in the right files. If it's really complex though and I can't figure out the dependencies, exporting a Unity package can also find those dependencies for you. You just export the parts that you want and it'll auto find all the dependencies. I can't find any good info about the stuff replacing Unet. That's because there really isn't much info about it. They haven't announced a whole lot other than their FPS demo that uses some UDP and a bunch of custom code. I think that they're working on something and they're probably going to announce it as a big secret, but I don't really know. A lot of people are using Photon and Bolt and other options in the meantime. Seem like totally fine options. I mean, Unet came and then died faster than all of those things have had a life cycle. So expecting the next thing to last. Who knows? Like, just I would look at what the options that are out there now, see if any of them make sense for what you're doing. How do you work shaders in the project? Do you have a special tech artist guy or someone just knows everything? Yeah, usually, in fact, every project I've been in, we have some special tech artist person who's really good at it. Now, on the projects where they're small enough that we don't have that, somebody on the team will try to figure it out and usually reach out to one of our good tech artist friends and get advice and tips on the thing that they're missing or the problem that they're having that they can't figure out. The shader development it's a somewhat different skill from general game development. It's a slightly different mindset and thinking. So a lot of people are really good at shaders and really bad at gameplay code, or really good at gameplay code and really bad at shaders. I see it. I'd say most people fall into one of those boats. Some people are really good at both. But most of the time we have somebody dedicated to one, just the shader stuff, at least on any bigger project. What else we got here? People talking about updating a game for a long time so that over time becomes a different game. I don't know. It happens a lot. I mean, it keeps games around. Sometimes games change dramatically from when they come out to when they die. The new Unity UI builder looks interesting. Any plans to explore it with a tutorial? Definitely. So I'll probably do one for either 2019.3 or 2020.1, going over the new UI changes and a bunch of the new stuff that's coming and that's in there now. I've been using 2019.3. I like it, but we'll see. Let's see when you deselect, do you remove them from the list? Oh yeah, so this is back on that RTS selection stuff. So yeah, when you deselect them, you just unselect them. They get removed from the selection manager's list. And then when you re-add them, they get added back in. And probably be like a hash set too, so that they're unique. They can't be added twice. Somebody asked what I was working on in Pantheon. All kinds of stuff. Mostly gameplay code. The back-end server stuff, some of the client stuff, not the shader stuff. A guy named Bruno does that. He's really good at it. I'm not so much, right? So mostly gameplay type stuff, combat things, all that. Let's see, procedural textures to keep the game size small. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It also works for really high detailed textures when you want to have big stuff. That's a thing a lot of AAA games do now. I don't know that it's necessary for most games, but it does make sense for some. How often do you work on Unity mobile? Very rarely now. I used to do a lot of mobile stuff. When I started with Unity, it was all mobile, and I've pretty much transitioned away from that 100%. Occasionally, I'll deploy things out to a mobile device or help somebody with an app that runs on mobile, but I generally don't build many mobile apps or games. I don't know. I got really into them, got excited about them, and then kind of got over them, and I just really like doing PC stuff now. So let's see what else we got. How can you learn advanced things about programming? Yeah, courses, videos. I don't have a good solution for that other than like taking some longer, more advanced courses, or just building stuff and building with other people. Pairing and mob programming is a great way to do it. Yeah, somebody mentioned Fortnite initially was a PvE base building game, and then they modified it, morphed it, and turned it into the thing that was going to be a success. So if I load a project from the asset store and it says I can't have a folder with assets in it. I'm not sure what the problem is. It sounds like an issue with a specific asset, but I don't know what that is. If you can clarify a little bit more, just shoot me an email. I'll let you know if I can help there. Let me put my email address in here one more time, though. The only beard care tips that I have are I never actually use a razor. I just use I use my clippers like every month or so and just trim it down. That's about it. And no, I'm not working alone. And somebody asked, do you use TDD in the industry? I don't use TDD, which is test-driven development, but I do use unit tests heavily. I'm a huge fan of unit tests. I used to hate them in GameDev, or I used to struggle with them and not be able to make sense of them in GameDev. Now I love them, and I recommend unit testing for just about everybody, for any project that you're going to keep around. It's a good habit to get into. It's a good way to develop and a good way to end up speeding things up dramatically. It's how you get, I still have it, my beautiful little technical debt paper with my kids' math on the back. But it's how you stay on this green line and don't end up with the giant technical debt and slow down of speed, right? You stay on the green line with unit tests, clean code. Let's see. Do you have a game studio on your own? You're working at a company? No, I just do stuff, contract for other studios now. And just don't have any game ideas that I want to build and release myself. I love to code them. Designing them and coming up with what's going to be fun is somewhat outside of my skill set. And I'm realistic about it. For Oculus Quest, it's not much harder than mobile stuff. I mean, it's very much like mobile stuff and VR. And then you publish to the Oculus Store and Steam, I'm sure. But Oculus Store is probably the best place for that. Do you use mocks for unit testing? If so, yep, I use NSubstitute. NSubstitute all day, and it makes unit testing make sense. So if you're doing unit testing and you're not using NSubstitute in Unity, it's not going to make a lot of sense. You're going to wonder why you're doing all this extra work, what the point is. Like, you're doing a lot of extra stuff, writing a lot of garbage code just to test things that aren't real. Once you switch to NSubstitute and start to see some of the value and the cool stuff that it does, it simplifies that, and suddenly, at least for me, it makes it click. Should you design a game on paper before you start building it? Definitely. You should definitely design it. I mean, on paper, in a Google Doc, something. You should have an idea of what it is that you're going to build, what you think is going to be fun. Build that part first, the part that you think is going to be fun, that core gameplay loop, and then go from there. Don't build all the other stuff first. Don't build the underlying infrastructure, the menu systems, all that crap. Wait, get the core stuff done, and make sure that it's going to be fun first. Okay, scriptable object save versus reflection method. For saving data, I would go with player prefs generally. I know some people save stuff in scriptable objects. I don't still feel super comfortable with that. I'd go with player prefs most of the time. Unless it's going into like a remote database store through some web service or something. Let's see, anything else down here? Somebody's asking about an Android manifest for AdMob. That I don't know anything about. It would be a good question for Discord, though. Somebody might know. And have you ever created an FPS game? Any big pros or cons for that genre? I don't know. I mean, I mostly worked on third-person type games, not so much first-person. The biggest cons are just that it's a huge market, and it's like the biggest, probably a top market where it's really hard to stand out. Like, you've got to do something really cool and really unique because all of the biggest IPs are building FPS games, and they're all doing all kinds of crazy stuff and pushing the limits. So being able to stand out as an FPS, I think, is extremely hard. And like I said, I don't think I'm a good game designer. I think I can code, not design. So I can't tell you what to do to make that better, though. So best way to save data online for mobile games, I would use probably some third-party service. In the past, I've done it with my own, setting up my own web services and dealing with all that. But really, it's probably not worth the effort. You probably want to use a pre-built system like PlayFab, which I have on my list to do a video about, and just go with that so that you can store the data and not have to worry too much about it. If it becomes a cost problem, then sure, you can refactor and change and maybe adjust that out of there. But most of the time, we just want to get the project done. We want to get it working, get it right, and then we can worry about that stuff. So I would probably not build my own if I was starting off from scratch again. Of course, when I did mine, those didn't exist either. So at least I don't think they did. If they did, I didn't know about them. I should have looked them up. Let's see. Somebody else was working on those PantheonMMO.com. You can check out the game. I talked about it a couple times. I just don't want to go on to it too much more. Do I use mocks for unit tests? Yeah, I hit that one. Oh, okay, sorry. Chat's kind of confusing me. Best way to save data? I already answered that. Do people animate in Unity or outside and import things? Outside. I don't know anybody who does their animation in Unity for characters. Now, for object animations, like recording an animation of moving a thing or a drawbridge or whatever, I do plenty of those inside Unity where it makes sense. But for like, if you're talking about character animations, like you want to get a run and a walk and all that, that's always, every time I've seen it done, it's done outside of Unity. And it's done by animators who have tools that they prefer, and what they use somewhat varies on who the animator is and what the team is. Let's see. Take a couple more. Is the Unity terrain editor the most RAM and GPU efficient way to create a large map? I don't know. So the Unity terrain has changed. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but there's a new terrain system. I think it's in the package manager now and on GitHub. And it's changed dramatically from what I can tell. I haven't used it in a real project, so I'm not sure. I think before it was relatively limited. People used it sometimes, but most games didn't use the Unity terrain, at least most more advanced ones, because there were some serious drawbacks to it. I think there were a couple performance issues, and then a lot of just things that you couldn't do with it. Making seamless tiled ones was relatively difficult and kind of painful. Putting holes in things was pretty much impossible. There were a lot of just different issues like that. So I don't know what it's going to be like. My guess is that with the new system, they'll probably do an awesome job and make something really cool. So I'm hopeful that that's the case, but I don't know enough about it to say for sure. See, somebody mentioned Firebase. Oh, interesting. Apparently banned in China. Did not know that. Okay. But as an alternative to PlayFab, I think. And then, is there a best way to save and load game objects dynamically when the player is playing? Well, what do you mean by save and load? So what I would say normally is you want to save and load the data. So you want to have like a class or data structure that's got the data for the object. And then what you'll do is maybe pull an object that's that type out of a pool. So you have like a pooling system that holds a bunch of, like if it's NPCs or whatever, a bunch of NPCs, you'll pull the NPC out of that pool and then do a setup with that data that you've loaded from player prefs or wherever you loaded it from. So that way you're not instantiating and destroying things constantly, and you're keeping it as lightweight as possible, the amount of, or the data that you're storing. Somebody's asking about using an AI controlled boot to walk around a level and collect game statistics. I'm not sure. Not something I've done. I'm not sure what kind of statistics you would grab, but I'd be curious to learn a little bit more about what you're asking there. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out when I look at it. I need to dig through email. I've got a bunch of emails that popped up over the last day, so I need to dig through them. And okay. I'll take this and then maybe one more question. So, what do you think about building a game and selling game assets on the Unity store? If you're building custom art for stuff and you don't mind other people using it, I highly recommend that you just prepare it, clean it up, and put it on the asset store, because selling art on the asset store isn't. I'm not saying it's easy to do as a getting people to buy it thing, but the amount of effort involved in selling the art and having people buy it is really low. If it comes to a code problem, though, like you're building some code package, expect to need to deal with support requests, right? You're going to have people that have questions, that don't understand the thing or that can't use it, and are going to want to ask questions. And if it becomes popular or it's complicated or a big key part of a game, that could add up to a lot. So when you're doing code-based ones or like project things, give it a lot of thought and make sure that it's something that makes sense for you financially, that you're going to put it up there and it's not going to cost you way more in time to manage and maintain. When it comes to art stuff, if you get it clean, get it packaged up in a Unity setup that, have a couple people go through, try it out, check, make sure that things are in the right folders, animations are all hooked up right, all that stuff works. Do that. I would put those up for sure, because you don't really have to deal with it much, and you can build up a nice passive income source that is good, right? I mean, like I said, I've known people that made a lot of money on the asset store, just passively, many thousands of dollars, not doing it. I wouldn't say not doing anything, but just continuously since they'd released things, and just constantly releasing more things will help with that. Wow. I said I'd take like one more and a bunch more popped up. Let's see. Pantheon's not using a heavily modified version of Unity. Yeah. So somebody said they read that. It's not. It's using some custom stuff it's using a lot of custom things inside there, but it's not like a source code modified version of it, right? A lot of people assume that you need that too, and you generally don't. Like a lot of the time people want to know like, hey, you're using Unity instead of Unreal. Like you could have the source code for Unreal, and I could, yeah, but most of the time we're not going to look at that source code unless we have a problem that we cannot solve or a question that we can't figure out the answer to. We don't generally go into the source code for the engine because it doesn't make sense. You're much more likely to break things and cause problems changing that than you are to make things better. Now, if you really understand the engine, sure, you could make some big improvements. I know at least one guy who does Unreal stuff, and I would trust him to make any changes to the engine totally fine. Most people, though, I wouldn't say would need to go into there. So I don't even know where that came from or why I started rambling on about it, but hopefully you get the idea. Let's see. Anything else? Let's see. Some nice comments. I appreciate it. Thank you. And best approach for localization. I would look at some of the assets that are available. It's a problem that a lot of people have had to deal with, and the assets, I think, do a relatively good job that are on the asset store, but it's not something that I deal with at a massive scale. And any red flags when you hire people? I don't know. It's a good question, but I don't have a good answer for it. I have to think about that. I should ask people about that, really. I haven't hired enough to come up with good red flags. I mean, I've seen some people that it's like definitely not going to hire them, but yeah, it's a good question. I don't know. Anyway, I don't know if you guys like this stuff. I have a lot of fun doing them. If you do, make sure you hit the thumbs up button and all that stuff, or subscribe if you're not. I'll probably do another stream, I don't know, Thursday or something. There's a lot of stuff going on, but I'm going to at very least be doing these weekly, just answering questions, probably every Tuesday and maybe a couple other days. If you got any questions, just shoot me an email. I posted my email address in the chat. And I guess that's it. I'm going to head out because I'm getting super thirsty and hungry and got to go get a bunch of stuff done. So thanks again. Appreciate it, everybody. Again, hit me an email if you got any questions or stuff.